Hello, I'm Ross King, author of Leonardo and the Last Supper, which is a behind the scenes, in the studio, up on the scaffold history of how Leonardo da Vinci painted one of the world's most famous works of art. I think the painting itself, the image itself of the painting, is familiar to most people, but much less well known is how Leonardo came to paint it and how the process he went through as he painted it. And it's this fascinating history of the work that I tell in my book. The word that was used most in the century after the painting of the Last Supper to describe the work was miraculous, and the painting is indeed miraculous. But what amazes me about it, and what I hope readers of the book come away with, is the fact that it was never a done deal. I think we tend to abstract masterpieces from the conditions of their production and forget that there was a time when the outcome was in doubt, when Leonardo might have failed at creating it because of the particular set of circumstances in which he found himself. And so what I really want to do in the book is rewind to the beginning of the project and take the reader step by step through Leonardo's process and look at the problems he had to solve, whether they were up on the scaffold, or whether they were in his studio, or whether they were out on the battlefield when there was a clash of arms happening that was threatening what he was doing. And so it's this fuller story of the Last Supper that I try to tell, the human element of Leonardo's remarkable couple of years on the scaffold in Santa Maria delle Grazie that I hope to bring out. One of the things that Leonardo had to do was position 13 men, in other words, Christ and the 12 apostles, around a table where they're having dinner and making a discussion. One of the other things he had to do, obviously, was to find 13 models, potentially 13 models for Christ and the apostles. And so where did he find them? It seems that he used his friends in high places, because a contemporary of Leonardo who discussed the painting with him said that what we see in the Last Supper are portraits of eminent Milanese courtiers who were known to Leonardo da Vinci. The only courtiers that we know absolutely for certain who modeled for Leonardo were a young aristocrat named Alessandro, whose family came from Parma, who modeled the hands of Christ. One of Leonardo's notes says, Alessandro from Parma for the hands of Christ. The head of Christ, and presumably his face also, were modeled by someone else, a soldier named Giovanni Conte. It does seem that Leonardo, in the finest tradition of Renaissance painters, added his own self-portrait at least once, and I believe possibly twice, into the painting. My evidence for that is based on a poem, a little-known poem that was written right around the time that Leonardo finished the Last Supper. The recent restoration of the painting allows us to see, for the first time in a couple of hundred years, what exactly Christ and the apostles are eating. And it's actually a very interesting dish. Leonardo has served up a dish of eels and oranges to them. Eels were a luxury food that was associated with the royal courts and also with gluttony. Leonardo was fascinated by the expressive possibilities of the human hand. And so the painting is full not only of facial expressions, but also hand gestures. It's really a ballet of moving hands, a kind of brouhaha of pointing and gesticulation, which Leonardo uses to develop character and identify the apostles to us, and also to tell the story. Leonardo was probably the most famous left-hander in history, and it's interesting to consider that he turns Judas into a southpaw. This is something that no other painter of a Last Supper ever did. But Leonardo seems to use the cluster of negative associations around left-handedness, associations that he would have been well aware of, in order to cast aspersions on Judas and make us realize which character is going to be the betrayer of Christ. And so he has Judas reaching towards Christ with his left hand.